Thank you very much for coming tonight, and it's a real pleasure for me to have been invited to talk with you and with David about his book. It's a beautifully written book and a very brave book, because I read the book in galleys when his editor sent it to me from New York and asked me to write a blurb for it. It's quite different from what he's done in the past, and I won't go into the book except briefly to say, for many of you may have read it, if you haven't read it, you should. It is the story of his decision to really batten down and become a real Parisian and buy an apartment and renovate it, and the agony and the ecstasy of what this involves. Anybody who's had Paris real estate experiences, I think their heart will go out to David, as mine certainly did. But I think that it was one of the most interesting things about the book is that David has lived here. You've been here for over 10 years now.
Since 2004 or 3, I don't remember.
Right, so almost 15 years. Do you consider yourself to be a Parisian?
No.
Okay. Is Paris still a foreign city for you, and France a foreign country?
Paris is not a foreign city to me, but France is a foreign country. Because I know the city really well, but I don't know the country that well. But that's okay, most Parisians don't either. So maybe I am a Parisian. You know France very well, you travel a lot, and I stay home a lot.
Okay. But the decision to sort of cross the Rubicon and become a property owner, is this working? I hope so. Okay. What made you finally decide? I mean, David had a beautiful apartment in the 11th. He lived in a great flat that was all the way on the top floor, and he had beautiful views over Paris. How he managed to write cookbooks in a kitchen that was maybe the size of these 2 chairs is beyond me, but he somehow, and he had a refrigerator that was the size of a shoebox. It's pretty easy to understand why you wanted to move, but tell us a little bit about why you decided to cross the Rubicon.
Well, I'm a Californian, so it's all about real estate. No, I figured I'd lived in San Francisco a long time, and
You're
I knew.
from Connecticut, like I am.
But I'm a Californian. I moved when I left Connecticut when I was 17, and you left. You stayed there most of your life, didn't you?
No, I lived in New York and then I lived in London.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were a real Connecticut boy.
No harm intended, anyway.
No, but I decided I was going to stay here, and I saw what happened in San Francisco, and I thought, well, you know, if I'm going to stay here, I should buy something, because, you know, real estate gets expensive, and I didn't want to be priced out. So I decided to start looking for an apartment, and I had no idea the process. Has anyone here bought an apartment in Paris? Okay. Did anyone enjoy the process? One hand. Okay. It's very challenging, and I had no idea what it was going to be like, because it's very different than the way we do that in America. And not to say one way is better or the other, although in this instance I will say that I think the way in America is better would be multiple listings. But then I decided I was going to, you know, a lot of people move here. You've been here a long time. You've been here 30 years. And you see a lot of people come and you see a lot of people go. A lot of people, you know, they write a book about how great Paris is, and then like a year later you see they're moving. Oh, I'm moving back. So, and I decided to stay. It was very, you know, I have a partner, I have a life here. And so I thought, I'm going to set down roots. So
And what
it was all downhill.
No, not entirely, but
Yeah.
it was not easy. We can certainly say that. You live now in the 11th arrondissement, which I think is one of the most interesting parts of the city for food lovers. I mean, it's where many young chefs decide to open restaurants when they go out on their own. It's a part of the city that has a very decided gastronomic identity, and it's just an interesting, lively, young, mixed part of the city.
I'm the oldest person in the
That's okay. That's okay. You're not in a wheelchair yet, but the difference I mean, when I talk, I remember the last special issue that we did at Gourmet, Paris issue, when I was sitting around a conference table in New York, and I said, well, we can't do the same old Ernest Hemingway, yada, yada, yada thing. I've lived here for too long. The really interesting things, let's send people, everyone loves Paris, but let's help them to discover something new about the city. Let's write stories about the 9th arrondissement, the 10th, the 11th, the double-digit outlying arrondissement. Let's prize people off of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. Let's get them away from all these myths of cafe life and send them into the real city. My suggestion was met with totally blank faces. Jonathan Gold, the food critic from the LA Times, was in town for the meeting. And Jonathan said, Alec, that's a really great idea, but the thing is, Paris is the somewhere over the rainbow for so many Americans. They want to find the Paris that they have in their heads when they go there. I'm not sure that it's that they want to trade in the reality of, or trade in their fantasies for the reality of the real city. What do you think, David?
Well, I agree with that. You don't need to tell people to go to La Durée who are coming to Paris. They already know to go there. And it's kind of, I love La Durée. It's a great place. But it's not interesting for me to write about because it's been done. And there's nothing else I could say about it. That said, when I started writing my blog, I had when I moved here, I thought I'm going to write for magazines and I'm going to, write about these little chocolate shops that no one has heard of. And so I started writing about them, and people started going to them. And it was very interesting because there's the old line, like we want to go, we get the email a lot. We want to go to like an out-of-the-way place where there's no tourists off the beaten track. And they don't really want to do that. I'm like, yeah, go to the 20th.
Where would that be, by the way?
Yeah, behind it's like, do you speak
You
French?
have a couple of addresses you'd like to share?
I mean, the good stuff is actually where, the people are. There's not like an out-of-the-way hidden restaurant in Paris left anymore. But there are a lot of chocolate shops and bakeries and neighborhoods, like Blé Sucré, that opened. And that became, it was like off the beaten track, but it was safe because it was this beautiful little park. And those kind of places I think people wanted to know about. And then after we started writing about them, because we were sort of on the ground here, most magazines have somebody who comes here and writes about it, and then they go back to New York. To be on the ground here, to be a part of life, for those of you who live in Paris, you know how important it is to be part of people's daily life. You can't just make a phone call and say, I want to write about your bakery. They'll be like, sorry, we're closed, we're done. It's about friendships and connections and long-term relationships. Paris is very about relationships. So, that's why I stay too, because I realize I've developed these long-term relationships with people, and it's a different city when you have that relationship. But I also want people to come here and experience, going to maybe a bakery that's not La Durée and going, oh, and then, having a good welcome, but discovering something.
Well, I think that the huge success of your wonderful blog attests to the fact that there really is an interest and a desire to find these places. But what made you, when you first started looking, did you have a part of the city that you had sort of zeroed in on, or parts of the city you decided you didn't, were off, not?
Well, I wanted to stay in the 11th. I mean, as you know, when you live in Paris, you never want to leave where you are, because once you've met the butcher, the bakery, the pharmacist. I said once online, I said the pharmacist is the most important to you in France. And somebody was like, what does that mean? I was like, that's a very loaded subject. I mean, it encompasses so much about France, French culture.
She knows everything about you.
Yeah, they know everything, and you're like your friend, your confidant, your parent, and everything. It's great. But I didn't really want to move. I wanted to stay in the 11th, but I wanted to get away from the Bastille, because at the time the Bastille wasn't actually that interesting. It was, it's kind of like the Marais, and no offense to the people who live in the Marais, it's a beautiful part of the city, but I was living sort of near the Place des Vosges, and my best friend lived in the Place des Vosges, and just walking those 2 blocks was like, you need like football pads, to get through. So basically I wanted to stay in the 11th, and I wanted a top floor apartment, because if anybody, those of you who live in Paris, I'm not going to make you raise your hand, but people always have trouble with their neighbors upstairs. And I was living on the top floor, and I was like, I don't want to have problems with neighbors upstairs. Those are my 2 criteria.
So you decide you want to stay in love. I think, David, it's very true. You put your finger on something that's great about the city. those relationships which inform your daily life when you actually live here. I was standing waiting for a bus not far from here a couple of weeks ago, and a very gruff man was smoking, and the smoke kept blowing at me. And finally he turned to me and he said, "How are you?" And I said, "I'm fine," and I didn't recognize him. And he said, "You don't remember me at all, do you?" And I said, "I'm afraid I don't." And he said, "I used to be your butcher." I'm retired now and I live, somewhere else. And he said, "I remember you." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because when you came into the store the first time and you asked for sein de poulet," I don't know how many people speak French, but
Téton de poulet.
sein is the French word for the female breast. So he said to me when I said, and he looked at me wide eyes, and he said, "Sein de poulet?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd like 6 of them." And he said, "I'm sure you would." And then he said, "If the chickens in America have some, maybe I'll move here." Maybe I'll move. I had no idea what was going on. And finally, an impatient old lady behind me sort of said, "Leave him alone." And she said to me, "This is a son." Got it.
Sure.
She said, "What you want is a blanc de volaille." But it's true, there's this web of relationships that you create, and you don't want to give them up.
Right.
So I completely understand your desire to stay in the same general area. So tell us a little bit about how the search started and how you chose. I mean, you saw some real dogs, and you saw some places that got away.
Well, the hardest thing about finding an apartment is you have to go visit the apartment. Yeah. There's no open houses, and the pictures, they've gotten a lot better. The pictures used to be, there was like dirty towels on the floor. Even now, though, if you go on like the real estate websites, it's kind of funny because they're selling their apartment, but there's like one picture and it's like the outside wall. Like,
the warning sign.
Yeah, it's like, why? With the mailbox. I'm like, it's like, why do you want to show us a picture? So you have to go and meet all these people, and a lot of times the owner's there. In America, the owner's never there. And French people are very convivial. They like to talk, and I actually don't like to talk. My partner is French.
You can leave now if you like.
Yeah. Well, I saw Barbra Streisand being interviewed before her last concert. She goes, "I hate giving concerts."
I don't believe that, but anyway.
No. Well, she likes getting the check. But, my partner loves to talk. So, I'm American. I go in, I look at a place, I'm like, "No, thank you. It's very nice. Merci beaucoup, c'est super gentil." And the guy's like, "Do you want a coffee?" And I'm like, "No." He's like, "Yeah, sure." And he's getting comfortable. So it took a long time. It took like 5 years to find the apartment. We had a lot of coffee, met a lot of people.
You find any good recipes during the
No, but I saw a lot of bad apartments, like things that were scary and frightening and dangerous. And just, one place we looked at, there was like armed guards outside with machine guns. It was like, I don't think I want to live here. That was like sort of strange. One was above a rap studio. They're like, "Oh, we only practice like at 2 a.m. I'm like, it's completely soundproof. I'm like, well, I hear it now. So that was, and you had to change your parameters. You go into these things thinking, I want this, this, and this. So then you start going, okay, this isn't available. This isn't available. This is the only thing available. So you have to so I thought, well, maybe I'll go for an espace atypique or atypique. And I thought maybe I should get something creative like a loft or an atelier.
Meaning offbeat, something a little different from the normal bread and butter apartment.
And also back then that was considered a fault. You'd say it was not desirable. Like nobody really wanted to live in a loft. They were like, well, why would you want to live in a place that didn't have like a kitchen, a bathroom, a bedroom, the standard French, apartment. And people, there was the cuisine américaine, which is the open kitchen. I said it's American to have an open kitchen. So, a lot of Americans see pictures of these French country houses. They go, well, everyone eats in the kitchen. Like, well, not really in Paris. So I decided to change my parameters and look for something a little more creative, as they say. I know all the real estate lingo in French and in English.
So how did you feel, in terms of your being an American, how did your nationality come into play in the whole process of apartment hunting? the way that people reacted to you, do you think it was, how much harder was it to be an American, to be looking for an apartment than it would?
Deer in headlights, I'm sure.
Right, exactly.
Well, a lot of times they hear your accent and they want you to come because Americans were much more, our wallets are open. You know, I noticed that in stores, when it's time to pay, we always, if you go to America, especially people have their credit card already out. In France, they stand there, and then when it's time to pay, then they take out their wallet. And I'm always standing there with my wallet out and, you know, ready to pay. So there was no shortage of agents that wanted to show me places, but luckily my partner was there who's very French. He's Parisian, he's very tough, and he'll tell me right to my face things. If anyone has a French partner, you know, they're like, I don't like that shirt on you, you know, and I had to get used to that. But he was very good, and that, you know, that comes in really handy when you're trying to buy an apartment. So he was very helpful, but I had to get used to the system. I just was so unaccustomed to having to go through all these different channels and making phone calls and so forth.
So finally you found your dream come true. Do you want to describe the state of the apartment when you first discovered it?
Did you see it?
Sure.
Did you see it before I bought it? Okay. It was pretty bad. I was, you know, surprised someone. It was like, imagine living in this kind of, like if this was your apartment, but the windows were all covered up. You know, it's like, what? There's no light. And it was very oddly configured. The bathroom took up a prominent amount of space. The windows were all cracked. The kitchen sink was black. It was like Darth Vader. It was like staring into like the, you know, the Death Star or something, washing dishes. So it was very dark and foreboding, and I'm usually pretty good at seeing stuff, but I didn't see all the faults. I was like, well, this is a great space, and I saw that. It was had great bones, but I didn't understand like electricity, plumbing, and I had an architect come in. In France, you don't do an inspection like they do in America. And then the contractor tells you what's wrong, or in my case, the architect came in, and she was like, and she sort of told me, you know, she read the agent the riot act first, and then told me outside, like, what to do. And I was so shocked because I didn't realize it was going to be that much work.
And
then
what
she
happened?
sped away, and I never saw her again.
So once you overrode the objections of the architect, then what happened?
Well, to condense the story, no spoilers, but I found a contractor. And one thing about France that I always tell people, there's like 3 words if you mention to a French person, if you want to see them go ballistic. One of them is entrepreneur, contractor. Everybody has a story, and people just, you know, that's one of the few professions. Real estate agent's the other one. Is anyone here a real estate agent? Okay. So I had to find a contractor, and then, you know, I got references for one, and, you know, he was highly recommended, and I thought, oh, this is great. It was really nice, and I was like, this is going to be great. He's like super nice. I'm going to make cookies for the crew, and they're going to fix it. And I actually first thought it just needed like cosmetic stuff, and then I didn't realize the extent of the physical stuff, right, which is really stupid. I mean, everything that happened to me, I blame on me. I was like, oh, it just needs like paint, and we'll move this wall, and we'll put a new cabinet in and counter, and that'll be my kitchen. Yeah, Alec is like laughing at me.
Well, I've read the book, so again, we don't want to give away too much of the plot. How would you describe what happened next in a small number of words?
A recipe for disaster.
Okay. David had a really tough time. The contractor turned out to be a real bum, and someone who was just insanely incompetent, which threw you. I mean, when I read the book, there was a moment where he had to leave his apartment. And as anyone who's self-employed and or works at home knows, there's nothing more catastrophic than having not just, I mean, a move is always hard, but when you're moving your life and your workplace at the same time, it's really, really difficult.
Especially when you test recipes for a living.
Well, and so there was one later, this is maybe halfway into the book, where there's a description of David's worldly goods with a plastic tarp over them in the new apartment, you know,
It was literally
covered with filth and sawdust and what have you. And it was an image that just made me, I mean, it was...
Was it the preservative I found in there?
Oh.
Yeah. It was new. I was like,
Well, at least they're having a good time.
well, it hadn't been.
A preservative is the condom for anybody who doesn't know the word in French, but it was, so, you know, things really went very, very, very wrong. And you ended up living with your partner for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, well, he has a studio, and so we live there, and it's been a long time since I've shared a studio with somebody.
You're still together?
Yeah, no, he's great, you know. And actually, he lives in Barbès, which is an area where I really love. So it was fun to explore and be in another neighborhood. But it was hard, you know, when you travel, you go away for a week, when you get home, all you want to do is change your clothes. You're like, I don't want to wear those pants anymore. I was just in Ireland, and I was like, I brought 2 shirts. I was like, I don't want to wear those shirts for like a month now. But I had to wear the same clothes for like months and months, probably 6 months. I had a little like suitcase, and it was all dusty and gross. And like I'd see my friends, and they would like cross the street before they. It's like, I just saw you on the street. They're like, that wasn't me. They're really like, everyone was avoiding me, and I looked really bad. I lost a lot of weight, and which was great because I bought all these clothes, and I had that little French waist that all these guys have. And I was like going into the shops and go, yo. Then after it was done, I couldn't. You know, I was like, I can go back to eating.
But also
Yeah, I
this
went to
was
Amen.
totally disruptive. I mean, it was professionally, as you mentioned, it was professionally disruptive too, because to write a blog and to be working, you'd finished my Paris Kitchen?
No, I was working on it when I was doing the renovation, and that, this book is sort of a prequel to that. And it's funny because people, if you read that book, you don't really know what was going on, what led up to that book. And to me, it's very interesting. You know, like we were talking before this, how life, like a lot of things about daily life are a lot more interesting than how fabulous French women are or who makes the best croissant. And so, like the story of what happened to me made my Paris kitchen. It made me realize like what I love about Paris, and it really made me miss my kitchen and cooking. And so all that came back to me. It was like a rush. It was like sort of a high to be writing that book, because it was like, wow, this is what I love about Paris. This is why I moved
So you
here.
completed my Paris Kitchen after you'd moved into your new place?
Yeah.
Okay. What did this really difficult experience, and what impact did it have? I mean, you mentioned it made me realize what I really loved about Paris. Would you want to share an example or two?
Well, you know, I love going. I'm inspired by the city. Those of us that live here, you know, daily life is fascinating. Like stuff that happens to me, just going to the bakery. Like today, like 10 stories happened to me just going to buy. What did I have to buy? Limes. You know, there's so many things that happen, like just going to the supermarket, and all those little things are really stimulating to me. I mean, it's very boring. You know, a lot of online, there's a whole sort of backlash now to this sort of Pinterest view of life. These people have very styled photos, and people are sort of having a backlash against influencers. And people often tell me, they go, well, I like to read you because you're different. You're writing about things that aren't normal, and you do that too. You're a very solid, you know, extraordinary writer, but in the story, it's not just about, you know, what's on the plate or what's going on in the restaurant. There's like a backstory, and usually the backstory is often more interesting than how good the chicken is or how beautiful the croissants are. So I love all those stories, and I got stimulated by Paris again. And then what happened, you know, I didn't want to write a book about what happened to me, but then I was like, wow, this is it's a great story about Paris. It's not a hit piece on me, because this happens everywhere. But it's about what happened to me in Paris, and it was really stimulating to write it. So
That's why when I read David's book, I mean, there were about 3/4 of the way through, it was almost painful, because I thought to myself, Mother of God, I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were with
and nobody
but
either.
but it was just one thing after another, after another, after another. But for me, the book is fascinating because it's a really deeply ruminated, incredibly honest reflection on, it's a coming of age story, which is sort of disguised as a real estate story. And coming out on the other side of the coming of age story, you've also acquired you've really become a Parisian. I mean, I think if you always had a nice sense of humor before, your sense of humor is on the dial of rye. I would have said when I first met you, when we were both exotic dancers in a nightclub in Hershey, has been turned up from maybe 4 to a good solid 9. And you have a wry sense of humor without anything bitter. And to me, there's something wonderfully French about that. I mean, the shrug, the bon bah.
I do that in America now too, and everyone's like, "What are you doing?" But France can often feel like a series of tests. When you go into a store, you never know how things are going to go. Often when you go you go in America, it was like, "Hi, can I help you? Oh, we'll get your size. Don't worry." In France, you have to be much more. Some people say seductive. Some people say, there's the French politesse, which sort of is part of that sort of dance you do, because they don't have to be nice to you, and that's not a criticism. It's just.
Are you talking about the SNCF, right? Air France?
No, I mean, people don't have to. The whole thing is they're there to sell you something, but they're not there to baby you and make sure they have your size or something. So everything requires a little manipulation. Once you're successful, you just feel so, like when you return something and it's like easy, you're just like, oh my God, that was great. Or when you get your papers done and it's all approved and they take out the stamp and they're do. You're just like, thanks. So they make it's sort of hard to live here. It's not an easy place to live. But on the other hand, the rewards are very much more profound, I would say.
What for example?
Well, now when I had an electrician come yesterday, and I know how to talk to people now, because I'm not like, oh, I don't know, what do I do? I'm like, no. And he was very good. So I understand that. In France, one of the great things about France is when you get someone who's an expert on something, they're really an expert, like the butcher, they know, these people know what they're doing. He was like an artisan electrician. But he was really good. He was old. So I actually learned old people are good. You don't want these young guys. You want these old people because they're wise.
Good news.
Yeah, no, they're for you. I'm older than you are.
I don't know, but we'll allow everyone to think that you are. But I think that's something else that is actually quite fascinating. I mean, I always remember one time when my mother was visiting when I lived near the Bon Marché. And I was at work, and when I came home from work, she was sitting at the kitchen table drinking a glass of that wine. I don't even know if they still sell it, but it was sold in plastic bottles, and it had 5 embossed stars in the top of it. I think it cost something like 2 francs.
That's white vinegar.
And I looked at it, and I said, "Mom, no, you don't drink that stuff." And she said, "I'm from Boston. I am not extravagant like my children. It tastes just fine." And I said, "Okay." I said, "How was our day?" And she went, "Poof." And I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "Every time I went into a store, every time I went anywhere, with my rickety old French from Mount Holyoke in 1951, I revived it. I sort of threw the switch on it, and I thought I was doing just fine, and everybody would look at me and go, "Oof." She said, "How can you stand it?" There's no service culture here whatsoever. People are very confrontational. And I said, "You have to talk back." And I think it's interesting. I mean, one of the, the life lessons, and David is very generous and very shrewd, and it's really fun to read the things, because when you do decide to live in another country, you learn things that are easy, like the rules of the road and different basic.
People also respect you here when you stand up, when you're not confrontational, but when you have Like the worst thing you can do in France is not have an opinion. So when you have something to say,
So when you finally, speaking of electricity, when you finally blew your switch, that was a very beautifully written part of the book, because sometimes in life you have to lose control to put yourself back together again and realize that you were going in a circle, and whatever it was, the one way that you knew of doing something was not going to be working anymore. So you found yourself sort of shattered and pulled yourself back together again. And this was after a confrontation with the contractor. And again, the horrors of what actually happened. I mean, you can read this almost like as a
but it's funny.
Work of science fiction. Sorry?
It's
No,
like
it is
science.
But I mean, it's like
humorous.
a chiller.
You know, there's a whole thing, like when you look back at things, they're actually clearer, and that's why, like, I actually fell apart when the whole thing was happening. That was the title of the book. You know, the worst thing you can do is entitle your book something that can't be pronounced in English. But I was like, it just had to be the title. So when I go to America, the people are interviewing me and they're like, "La part." I'm like, no, they're trying to be French. I'm like, no, it's la part. You know, I really did fall apart. But then you get strength pulling yourself back together again. And I learned a lot. One of the great things about being a writer, and I'm not really a writer, I'm a cook, is that you have to sit down and think about all this stuff. And I had to think about, like, what happened to me and why did this happen? And why am I writing about it? And that really became fascinating to me too, the process of coming back. And well, now I'm not.
That's
nice.
Why I really describe your book as a coming of age story. I mean, it's a almost sort of like Candide, you know, Voltaire's hero who goes through all sorts of hell and finally emerges with. David went through this horrendous experience and came out the other side of it. The original title, wasn't the original title My Big Fat Nervous Breakdown? No, okay. La Part is a nicer and more elegant title. And there's something a little mysterious about it. How did this experience affect your I mean, you live so much like I do through food and cooking and what you find on the plate. How did this experience affect the way you cook or the way that you think about food in any particular way? The book has a recipe at the end of every chapter, so I think that David, and a lot of the recipes are comfort food recipes, because when you're going through that nightmare like this.
Except for the cocktails.
That'll be the next book, right?
I had like 4 cocktails today, so I was really drunk all day, because I was testing recipes, and I sobered up before I came here. I was really like, I didn't finish them.
But how I mean, as part of this coming of age story, was there a gastronomic takeaway from this experience for you too?
No, but I think I appreciate everything so much now, because you don't appreciate stuff. You take stuff for granted. A lot of people have, like, you know, they have illnesses and they recover and they go, it was so good because I'm not comparing what happened to me to what happened. So don't tweet that out. But you know, when something happens to you, you just take stuff for daily life for granted. One of the things about even just moving abroad is the stuff that you might take for granted if you were staying in your home country. All of a sudden you have to revise your thinking and look at differently. And once again, I hit the bottom, and there's only one way to go, which is good. But it really made me appreciate my kitchen, what I had done. Because a lot of times people say, "Oh, you're so lucky." I'm like, no. Lucky is finding like a lottery ticket and it being the winning ticket. Things happen to us because we make them happen, good and bad. So I did learn what I loved about Paris, what I liked about cooking here. It's sort of cooking and food weaves itself through life in France. Everything in my life sort of revolves around food, and that's why I put recipes in the book, because they help tell the story. We tell stories through food, so even the cocktail recipes tell stories. If those cocktails could talk.
Is there a single recipe that in the book that you think best expresses the the experience of what you went through?
The cocktail, the truth serum. All I want is for people to tell me the truth. That's all I want in life.
And
Is that wrong? Is that is it? Do you want a better answer? Is that okay?
if you'd like to offer a better answer, but the other thing that I think is interesting, though, and it's again to go back to this idea that if people love reading, there's a huge, endless market for writing about France and Paris. But a lot of it trims a lot of and I've seen this happen to many things that I've written, where an editor will say, this is a little negative, or this is a little dark, can we take this bit out? People want to read about the fun parts of Paris. You were insistent that you told a story of your own truth. And when you contrast fantasy Paris to real life Paris, it ruffles some feathers occasionally. But what would you say, in terms of, what would your fantasy of what it would be like to live in Paris before you moved here from San Francisco, and what you know today? How would you find the city? What is the real city to you as opposed to what it was before you actually moved here?
Well, the good thing about doing talks in New York and in Paris those are places where people sort of have a love-hate relationship with their city. So people who live in Paris love it, but there's that famous French bumper sticker, like, I love nothing, I'm Parisian. And it's, it's a French, but it's not some Americans putting it on their car. So I forgot the question, but we're talking about the reality. I was talking to a friend yesterday, because someone had tweeted, do we need another book about how great French women do everything so effortlessly? And she had, the reason I saw it was because she had replied, she's like, well, there's thank goodness for people that don't, and she mentioned me and a few others. And then I wrote back, I said, well, having a French partner helps you keep everything in check, because that brings you back down to earth. But the real Paris is so much more interesting than that sort of fantasy. It's like New York. Like, when was the last time anybody here went to Times Square? Or Las Vegas, it's not that interesting. It's much more interesting to go to like neighborhoods and stuff. And that's why I find Paris so fascinating. It's all those things that aren't necessarily beautiful to, like, I just wrote a blog post a few weeks ago about going to the bathroom. Because it's a topic in France, going to the bathroom, like, you have to think about it a lot, why do people go outside, and I was like, should I write this? Is this going to be like weird for people? And I put all these pictures up of things in Paris that are on the street, so it wasn't like, I went to these underground places and took gross pictures. And it wasn't...
Your next book is about the urinals of France? Is
that right? Yeah. And you're going to write the introduction.
Okay.
It's...
I hope there'll be no recipes in that book.
We know where this one's going. Did I answer your question?
You did answer my question, but I think that it's, that idea of the vision of the fantasy place, now that you've been here for 15 years and you've had this, it's almost the experience of buying and renovating this apartment, which you're becoming an adult second time in a new culture. Yeah. When you go back to the U.S., for example, and spend some time there, a couple of weeks in America, and then you come back to France, when you get back here and you see the Sacré-Cœur on the horizon coming in from the airport, do you think, oh gosh, this is great, it's so nice to be home?
Once I get to that, like the area between the airport and there,
is not a good place.
It's not so great. It's like, can't they fix us up? Because it's like, oh. And actually, when I moved to San Francisco, I remember I arrived, and like that area around South San Francisco was nuts. I was like, everyone says it's so beautiful here. This is kind of ugly. Then I get there, you go around the corner, it's like, oh, okay. So Paris sort of needs to maybe do something like saying, keep going, it gets better. But yeah, well, getting in the cab, in the old days when you took a taxi or took the Aria, well, if you still do, that's kind of a jolt back to reality sometime. Although we took the Aria the other day and they were super nice. There was people on the platforms telling you where to go, and it went really smoothly and it was wonderful. But sometimes it's a jolt. I was watching French television. One actor who lives in America now, French actor, he goes, as soon as I get back to France, I get in a cab and he starts complaining and we get in an argument. He goes, and I know I'm back and I'm happy.
It's similar. Every time I go back to the U.S., my sister last time I was there said, you know, I'm always really happy to see you, but I don't like you for the first 3 days when you get home because it has to burn off. You're so aggressive with people in stores and you're impatient, and until you start being like us again. And she said, that doesn't work here, that impatient, cranky, critical. And I said, is it really that noticeable? And she said, it is. And she said,
Well, we notice it here too.
Oh,
I was going to talk to you.
yeah, that's the other way around. But and I'm also not allowed to go to supermarkets with her anymore either, because she'll put something in the cart and I'll pick it up and go, you're not, and don't even. I don't
I
want to hear
remember
about it.
the first time I went to like Walgreens after I'd been in France a long time. I looked at the shampoo aisle, and I just stood there like. There's some, and I don't have any hair left. I was like, why am I looking at shampoo? It's fascinating.
Well, it's true that drugstores tell a story too. When we
Yeah.
were in Walgreens the last time, my partner came to me and said, Alec, come. I went to the back of the store and there was an aisle where there was do-it-yourself dentistry stuff, including something called tooth glue. And we're both looking at this stuff and I'm thinking, no, you wouldn't. And this lady came along, and this is back to the service.
Give me that.
She came along and she said, can I help you? And I said, no, thank you very much. And but no, we were just looking at this. And she said, it works just great. And I said, well, thanks very much. And she said, are those all real? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, you know, it's not a bad thing to have on hand. My French partner said, this was the Twilight Zone. This was even worse than the one time that you took me to a Walmart, because as a New Englander, you were trying to save 10 cents on a roll of paper cuts, for which I will never forgive you. You know, for Bruno, Walmart is the ninth circle of hell.
Because Romain discovered Old Navy when we were in the U.S. and it was after the holidays, and everything was like $9, which in euros were like $6. It's like wool overcoat's like $6. And he came home. I was on the bus, and he had like these two huge. I'm like, what did you? It's like everything.
I spent $20.
Yeah. I'm like, we're returning this. We're returning this. We're returning this. He's like, you can return things. I'm like, it's a way of life.
Not only that, but you can wear them and bring them back.
Yeah, they don't care. They're like, and they really apologize when you return things in America. They're like, we're sorry. I'm like, okay. Apology accepted, man.
Are you at your place now? I mean, you've been there what for now 2 years?
No, 5.
In this place?
I think so.
Oh, okay. You're here for good then in this apartment.
You never know the future. If I knew the future, we'd all be buying lotto tickets. I'd give you all the numbers. I don't know. You know, when everyone who's done renovations, you always say the first thing it says, "I'm never moving." And now I'm like, oh, well, maybe I want more space. And it was funny because we found a house in Paris. We were walking down one of those little streets, and I was like, let's go for a walk down here. And we're talking to one of the neighbors. He goes, these people are selling their house and it had a garden. And it was like it was like a freestanding house.
That'd be great. Yeah.
And the people invite us in for coffee. Now I'm nice. I'm like, yeah, let's have coffee. You know, okay. And they were super nice, and it was this great house. And they're like, yeah, we're moving, we're getting old. And I'm like, and you ever talk about money in France? You know, you don't. The first thing in America, you'd be like, how much? You know, I gotta go, how much? So on the way out, I was like, so, what are you thinking of selling this for? And she said, 2 cents. I was like, oh, okay. So I would have moved if it was maybe there was a
2,700,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
in the 11.
Wow.
In 10 years, we'll all be like, why didn't you buy that? Idiot.
I think that everybody doubtless has a lot of questions they'd like to ask you directly, but I'll have one more question for you, and that is, are you working on a new book, and what do you want to tell us anything about it if you are?
I am, and that's why I was drunk. No, it's a different aspect of Paris life that hasn't really been, French culture that hasn't really been explored really too much. So I never talk about stuff till till the media announces it.
Okay.
So, but I did sign, when I wrote this book, for some reason I signed a 2-book deal. My agent was like, you'll be employed for the next 5 years. I'm like, I don't want to be employed. So I'm back on the stick.
I'd also mention David, one of David's other best-selling books, The Perfect Scoop, which is a book of ice cream recipes, has just been updated and re-released. So it's a terrific book, and with summer coming, that's something definitely to think about. I know we'll all be looking forward to your next book. So a final question.
And yours. You have a book.
Oh, yes, indeed. I'm just about to vanish and write my own gastronomic coming-of-age story, which I just sold to a wonderful editor at Houghton Mifflin in New York.
So in 3 years, it'll be reversed. I'll have the handheld mic.
3 years, not with this contract.
Oh, okay, yeah.
In fact, I should leave and go home and start. But the other thing is that, and one more question for you, David, and that is, how has your cooking changed in a general way from the way that you cooked? I mean, you lived in a city that is broadly considered to be the most gastronomically gifted in the United States, San Francisco. You moved from San Francisco to Paris. You've now lived here for 15 years. You've written several beautifully written recipe-based books. Living the Sweet Life in Paris and My Paris Kitchen. And now we have this very courageous and rather fascinating book. How would you say that your cooking has changed since you've gone through all of this experience of becoming a Frenchman?
One of the challenging things for me when I moved here was produce, because California is really, there's not just lemons, there's 8 kinds of lemons at the market. And the farmer who grew them. So I had to sort of adjust the way I cook a lot, because we didn't have all those things. And I had to discover there are those things in France, but you have to change, like there's all these cheeses. In America there's really good cheese now, but still it's not the same. There's not the cheese counter. It's so inexpensive here to buy cheese or bread. So I'm starting to use those a lot more than I used to. I cook a lot more meat. I never cooked meat in America. I just never, I was a baker, and I never cooked in America. I was always cooking in the restaurant. So I'd eat meat, but now here I go to the butcher and I'm like, I'm like, sang de poulet, You're like, we had a guy, remember the guy's back, He had some weird work done to his face.
They were really...
Yeah.
Actually, come to think of it, a lot of the chicken in the United States actually does look like it has breast, but that's
Right.
a whole other problem.
One thing that's interesting, when I go back to America, I actually lose weight because I'm not eating bread and cheese and wine. So here I'm like, because I just love it. Yes.
So there's a good reason to go in the other direction every once in a while.
Yeah.
Well,
I love bread.
thank you for your, thank you for this wonderful, honest, and very engrossing book.
You want your question?
Sorry?
Oh, sorry.
For letting me unpack it for us, for everybody here
Thank you.
tonight. But I'm sure now people doubtless have some questions they'd like to ask you directly. Please.
There are, in America, there's certain things you can do, like you can move a wall without getting a permit. If you wanted to do a load-bearing wall, you have to get a permit. And it's pretty much the same here in France. I had to get a permission from the city to change the windows, because in Paris, anything on the outside of a building is considered historic. Most buildings are classé, you say it, I guess in French. They're classified buildings, so they're historically protected. So you can't just put up a crappy window. They don't want to, it has to look right. So those I did have to get. I wrote about that, and that actually was pretty easy. That was one of the easiest things that I had to do in the book. But the inside stuff, like changing plumbing, doesn't. You do need to get permission from people in your building to do certain things to the building.
No inspection on the electrical system or plumbing?
No,
Wow.
I don't think they do that though in America.
Yeah.
Oh, they do in the US.
They do?
Oh, they
Okay.
definitely do.
Okay.
Definitely. Oh, yeah. And for the best.
was hamburgers, and it was funny because it was the time before. Remember, people have lived here a while. Remember when hamburgers were like hamburgers? Yeah, now that the hamburger is, now outsells the jambon beurre. But we discovered hamburgers, and I just started eating hamburgers and French fries, and they were really good. It was like meat and juicy. And we went to Big Fernand, and it was when they only had one, and it was really good, and they were super nice in there, so that was our happy place. Until Roman went in there once and he had forgotten his wallet, and they wouldn't give him a burger. He said, "I'm not going back." All mine are straight because I actually took them. They were all sort of taken down. It was a big square. But it was funny, I met somebody recently who had moved here, and he was looking for an apartment to rent, and he had kind of a lot of money, and he was being shown around by some agent, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, these places, a lot of the walls aren't straight. And it was weird because I went in the bathroom and they weren't. I was like, it's Paris. Nothing, it's not a rectangular city or square city. So I don't.
We wish you good luck anyway.
Use the ceilings. It probably took over a year to close, just the closing. And a friend of mine just bought a house in the country. She goes, it took 8 months. And she was like, oh my gosh, like that's all? Wow. It took over a year to do the closing. It took me about 2 more years after that before I had to establish, when I was writing the book, I kind of had to piece everything back together. Because when I was doing all the work, I wasn't keeping records of stuff. So I had to go back and look at all these papers, and I was like, what was the number of that psychiatrist?
And the cocktail shaker.
Yeah, the cocktail shaker. Right. So it was about, by the time I signed the papers, it was about a good 2 years. And leaks. There was an electrical leak, which cost me a lot of money. And there was a couple of other leaks, too, that I've discovered. I keep discovering things every few months. It's like the Winchester House in San Jose. What's up this?
Little shop of horrors.
But the electrician goes, you're still alive. I'm going to answer that after. I'm going to let you answer that, and then I'm going to, would you want me to go? And then you can go?
After you.
Okay. Well, it's funny because I had a friend who lived here, and she was from America, and she had a cocktail party, and we went, and my partner was, and he was shocked because she had like fresh figs with ham, and she had made all these appetizers. It wasn't like the curly balls and stuff like that you often get, those little, those little cheese things. And I was like, yeah, this is how people do apéro. I think part of it, and this is, it's a broader thing, a lot of French, especially younger people, embraced modernity a little too zealously, like Picard, that whole frozen thing. It was like, wow, we can get frozen food. And we went through that too, and we still, there's a lot of frozen food in America, that's a whole other subject. But a lot of people embrace it, and they're just like, we're gonna buy food. And I've talked to like younger French people, and they're like, yeah, my friends don't even know how to make like a zucchini soup. And a lot of them, I guess, aren't learning home skills, and I don't know why that is.
I think that you put your finger on something though, because one of the best-selling books in France recently, or 2 of the best-selling books have been a pair of cookbooks that were translated into English. The title in French is Simplissime, which is, these recipes are with like 3 or 4 ingredients that you can find in any nasty Franprix and whip up into dinner. Because the author said he realized that many of his friends did not know how to cook anything. The grandmother or the aunt or whoever it was who used traditionally, because it was often female work at home, might have shown you how to cook. It isn't cooking anymore because she's working. So that transmission of gastronomic knowledge has gotten a little bumpy. I noticed it also in the French food magazines because The recipes, a lot of the time, I look at them and I think, well, why would you jam all that stuff into a water glass just to end up with a dirty water glass? It's not going to, I mean, the food styling, I think, has become very international. I think that the food trends are a vector that you know, due to the internet, we're all living and eating more alike than we ever have before. Our lives resemble each other's a lot more than they used to. I mean, there are people in New York who assiduously go, for example, the Union Square Market, because food's really important to them and it's a leisure activity. Ditto in Paris, and then there are other people in both of the cities who either don't care or who don't have the time. And I think that the great myth of gastronomic, I mean, I would still defend France for its gastronomic laurels, but I think that there's been a convergence, if that answers your question. And just out of curiosity, what profession are we talking about? So I can turn down and get an invitation the next time this happens.
I'm a computer scientist.
Okay, there you go. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm glad I asked. Okay. Next question, please. David's book in My Paris Kitchen has a lot of wonderful savory recipes. I mean, his reputation was originally made as a pastry chef at Chez Panisse, but he's as gifted as a savory cook as he is as an ice cream maker or a pastry chef. So he has all kinds of, both on his blog and in his books, there are a lot of wonderful recipes for savory things.
My Paris Kitchen has a lot of savory recipes because it's like appetizers for courses, And this book has like 30% savory. And people, it's funny, every book I do, people go, do you ever do, and this is very nice, people always go, do you ever do savory recipes? And The Sweet Life in Paris, like there's carnita, the carnitas are great, so I do everything. But I have somebody who emails me all the time whenever I publish a sweet recipe on my blog, and he always goes, oh great, another dessert. I'm a baker.
Can't keep everybody happy.
So I made bagels today though, so those will be next. Well, they're not they're going to be very controversial. So I might have to get ready for my site.
Have a cocktail, please.
Well, the stove was there. That's the only thing I saved. The whole apartment was demolished, except for this little piece of stainless steel, which is my favorite place. I love stainless steel kitchens. I don't care if they're scratched. I don't care what anybody thinks about how great their kitchen is. Stainless steel is great. You can put anything on it, doesn't destroy. So I have it's a go down French stainless. It's a little 4-burner, and one of them is electric, which is great because when the gas goes, you have electricity. Yeah. And then the ovens are KitchenAid, and I actually got them because I worked for KitchenAid. I did a project for them, and I said I don't want to get paid, but I needed one of those. The magic number is 190 centimeters, and there's like only 2 or 3 companies that make 190 centimeter electrical ovens in France. They're not that common because they're big, and I needed them. They're like, "What are you opening, a restaurant?" I'm like, "Yes." So, I have to have an electric oven. So there was a noticeable dip in restaurant. It was noticed by the media internationally. There was a lot of articles, is France dying and blah, 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 blah. And that's in the past. And I think in the last few years, there was a lot of silly stuff done like 10 years ago. And you would go out to eat and you're like, foam still, and they're still using foam. But I think now, the last few years, a lot of the younger chefs have really gotten it together, and they're not just doing things to be audacious, because those things would sell. Like people would, like a lot of those restaurants somewhere else, they wouldn't have lasted, but here they were packed, like the cost kind of restaurants. Everyone's like, oh, tuna tartare. It's like. Yeah. So I actually feel that in the last few years there's been a major uptick, like in the 11th especially. There was a lot of bad stuff there, and now there's like anything that's new, like any vacant space is becoming a restaurant. Like Chambellan Bakery, when it opened, the gluten-free bakery, I walked in and I was like, this is changing the game. because now it's the best gluten-free bakery in the world. I mean, the breads are beautiful. They grind their own wheat, or not buckwheat and rice flour. I let the secret out. So I think there's been, I know, and a lot of it has been influenced by the Anglo culture, by us, a lot of Australians, a lot of Americans, a lot of British. On the other hand, we were influenced by them. I was influenced by France very heavily. My restaurant training was all based on French country cooking, the ideals of French country cooking, Italian, international as well. Very, very heavily French though. And I think that a lot of the young people are bringing that back, and it's being rebooted. It's not the same old French, because they're not cooking duck confit or cassoulet. They're reinventing something. And once again, the conclusion to that question is, what is French food? That's going to be, everything is much more international now. But I think I really see a really good uptick in ingredients. Just going to the market, there's really, I would say the quality of ingredients has improved 100% in the last 3 years at my market. So, they weren't bad before, but yeah.
Well, that's a very
You can
hopeful,
answer.
a very hopeful. No, I agree. I think that the restaurant scene here, it's like the rings of a tree. I mean, we keep adding new rings to the existing thing, and that's why the gastronomic culture of Paris is so wonderful, because you have tradition, which is surviving, but then there is these other rings of creativity, whether it's contemporary bistro cooking, a new restaurant like a place in the Latin Quarter, which is called Hugo and Company, that I went to the other night, that's just brilliant. And I also think that Paris today the chef there is Cambodian, but he worked in New York for a while, and it's the same thing. I mean, there's a nomadism, and the internet means that they all know each other, and they share recipes, and yet they're things that are profoundly French. I still believe that the quality of a real French professional culinary education is the best in the world. If you go into the École Ferrandi in Paris, it's ferocious, and they're not there to hold your hand or anything else. I mean, it's almost military in its seriousness and its precision. So I think, Paris remains, for me, the Western world, between London, Paris, and New York. And on another happy note, I also think that Paris offers really, really good value for the money compared to most of those other cities too. So David is going to sign books now, and that's another opportunity to pepper him with questions if you want to get up close. Thank you very much for coming.